John Paul II honored the indigenous people with a saint to call their own. Santo Juan Diego was canonized in July, but there are still some scholars who cast doubt about whether Juan Diego and the apparition he is famous for really existed. More from UCSD TV's Laura Castañeda.
Thousands of worshipers flocked to the Basilica in Mexico City to witness the canonization of Juan Diego by Pope John Paul II. The celebration marks the Pope's 464th canonization. Nevertheless, it was no routine event. Never before had the Roman Catholic Church officially recognized a humble Aztec peasant as a saint. According to the Catholic Church, saints of the dead are meant to hold up as models for the living, but one can only be considered for sainthood after proof that person has performed a miracle. Many of these worshipers insist Juan Diego has performed miracles as a healer. Last summer, the Vatican ruled Juan Diego helped save a young man's life. After the man suffered massive head and spinal injuries, the young man's mother prayed to Juan Diego. That, according to the Vatican, spared the victim's life. But that wasn't the first miracle, according to the Vatican. This Mexican movie, Las Rosas del Milagro, The Miracle of the Roses, depicts the first miracle, when the now famous apparitions occurred in 1531. It's believed the Blessed Virgin of Guadalupe suddenly appeared to Juan Diego while he was walking to catechism classes. The day was December 12th. The area, a rocky hill, is known as Tepeyac, just north of the capital of Mexico City.
Juan Diego, ¿dónde vas?
Señora y niña mía.
What happened next, according to the legend, the Virgin speaks to him in his native Indian dialect, asking the newly baptized Juan Diego to build a church for the people at that same site. Days later, she appears again, asking whether he delivered the message about the temple. Persistent, the next day the Virgin appears yet again. At this point, Juan Diego is humbled. He asks the Virgin for a sign for the friars who don't believe him. She abides. Suddenly on the hill, a rose bush appears. It's December and cold, a season when flowers could not possibly bloom. Juan Diego picks the roses and puts them in his cloak. He rushes off to see the bishop.
La verdad de mis palabras y mi mensaje, recíbelas.
In the final apparition, Juan Diego arrives at the monastery, spilling the roses out in front of the bishop. The image of the Virgin suddenly appears on his cloak. That image would later be recreated in different forms by dozens of artists and would also become a point of debate. Art historian Jeanette Peterson explains why.
There's so much other evidence that flies against the apparition even occurring. Zumarraga himself, for example, never mentions it. In any of his letters, in any of his testimony, he went back to Europe. He would have certainly communicated a miraculous event to his superiors in the church. It's not mentioned by anyone until the middle of the 16th century. In trying to reconstruct the historical Juan Diego, we find there are many discrepancies between the apparition legend and what we know as fact. The apparition was said to have taken place in 1531, but the monastery to which Juan Diego was going, that of Santiago de Tlatelolco, was not founded until 4 years later, or 1535.
Father Brown is a Jesuit priest at Our Lady of Guadalupe Roman Catholic Church in San Diego. He lived in Mexico City, 4 blocks away from where Juan Diego was said to be baptized.
The Pope, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, is not going to canonize a myth, and he canonized St. Juan Diego. There are facts. There's factual evidence that this person existed. This person received the imprint of the Blessed Virgin on his tilma. He went to the bishop, and there was an actual person. And of course, people can disagree, and they will continue to disagree to the end of the world.
As information about the apparitions changed over time, so did artists' renditions of the apparition legends.
This is an important painting, one of the first to be exported, of the Virgin of Guadalupe as the apparition legend unfolds, and it came soon after the mid-17th century accounts were published. It's by Juan Correa, who in fact was one of the most prodigious creators of Guadalupe images, many of which were exported to other countries. In this particular painting, you see the 4 medallions in the corners, and they depict the Virgin appearing to Juan Diego in her early appearances. You see Juan Diego asking her for a sign, and you see her in the medallion in the lower right giving Juan Diego the roses that he collects in his mantle. The climax of the story is depicted in the central rectangular scene where Juan Diego is standing with his mantle open, and impressed on it is the sacred icon of Guadalupe. And she becomes flat and static and in fact quite iconic at that point. So where she had been mobile and gesticulating in the earlier scenes, she now assumes the position of an icon. And in front of Juan Diego is the bishop in 1531, Juan de Zumárraga, surrounded by some of the clerics and priests in the episcopal palace. We can tell that Juan Correa's composition is an early work for a number of reasons. Not only the placement of the scenes is different. In many of the compositions that followed, the Virgin of Guadalupe herself takes front and center stage, and the medallions with the apparitions revolve around her.